20 years in prison. That's the sentence handed down today for Michael Drejka. The 49-year-old was found guilty just 6 weeks ago in the manslaughter death of Markeis Mcglockton outside of a Clearwater convenience store. 10 News reporter Eric Glasser has reaction to Drejka's sentence from the Pinellas courthouse.
I know in the Bible, it talks about you got to forgive those who trespass against you. But at this point in my life, I'm not there yet. And if the Lord just so happened to choose to take me before I get to that point, I guess me and Michael Drejka have to finish that in hell.
The case got national attention after Drejka shot and killed Mcglockton outside a Clearwater convenience store. A confrontation started with an argument over Mcglockton's girlfriend pulling her car into a disabled person's space. Outside the courthouse, Mcglockton's family and attorneys had mixed feelings about the sentence.
And we feel that it is fair. Of course, we'd have liked to see Michael Drejka maxed out at 30 years, but we believe that 20 is fair and appropriate.
We all fought hard for this day, and now I can go home and tell my children that the killer didn't get away with murder of their daddy.
Michael Drejka showed no emotion as Judge Joseph Bulone sentenced the 49-year-old to 2 decades behind bars.
I'm going to sentence you to 20 years in the Department of Corrections.
6 weeks earlier, a jury had convicted Drejka of manslaughter in the shooting death of Markeis Mcglockton, a deadly confrontation captured on surveillance cameras.
Let me say this about the video. Believe your own eyes.
Drejka has 30 days to appeal. His defense attorneys say that process is already underway and that they believe they have several grounds upon which to do so.
He has suffered greatly as a result of this prosecution. His family has suffered. He suffered financially. He suffered in ways that I wouldn't even be able to begin to delineate to this court. However, I will say that, as Mr. Camerino suggested, if there ever was a case that called for consideration of a departure, I cannot imagine facts that would support a departure more than in this case. Even apart from the divisiveness of the legitimacy of the prosecution itself, all of those issues, take those aside. Here's a man with absolutely no prior record, never been in trouble with the law, was attacked, and I know I'm going to be called racist again for saying it, because every time we mention this, there's a press conference later saying that we're all racist for saying that Mr. Mcglockton attacked our client, but he did. It's a fact. It's on video. And it's something the court not only should consider, the court must consider that in assessing a proper sentence in this case. I mean, just the other day, we heard that the Dallas police officer who was convicted of homicide in Texas was given a 10-year sentence. That's less than the guidelines in this case. There are a multitude of examples of imperfect self-defense, because that's essentially what we're talking about here. Is he acted in self-defense. The state's argued it wasn't truly self-defense under the law, so it's an imperfect self-defense argument that he should now be punished as if he were an intentional actor trying to kill someone. Essentially, they're arguing first-degree murder, but they charge it as manslaughter. We're here on a manslaughter case. We're not here to talk about intent, because intent's not an issue or element in a manslaughter case.
So it begins, Dear Judge Bulone, I'm writing to request leniency today when sentencing Michael Drejka, who is my husband. I met Michael 11 years ago and instantly fell in love with his laugh, his smile, and the way he made me laugh. We have been married for 9 of those 11 years, and every day I feel blessed to have it in my life. You may have noticed that I have not attended any of the court appearances, and I'm not here today for his sentencing. Please don't mistake my absence as a sign that I do not support him or love him. This case has gained a lot of unwanted attention for all of us, Michael, myself, our family, and friends. Due to the continued threats, it was decided that the only way to keep me safe was for me not to attend any court appearances, keeping me out of the media spotlight. The same decision was made regarding our family and friends who all wanted to be here to show support for Michael. I believe in my husband and trust him with my life. He is not the person that the prosecution and the media have made him out to be. Michael is a kind, loving, caring, funny, supportive, hardworking man who will do anything to take care of his family and help someone in need. Michael is an amazing man who has brought so much joy and love into my life. He makes me laugh every day. He dries my tears when I'm upset and listens when I need to talk. Since we have been married, I have had 8 different surgeries on my back, and Michael was there every day to help me through recovery. He is my best friend, my soulmate, who I love more than anything, and I will be at his side for the rest of our lives. We do not have any children in a traditional sense, but we do have our girls, our children, 2 German Shepherds. Research has proven that dogs and other animals can sense a person's personality if they are good or bad. From the day I brought our girls home, they have been Michael's dogs. They must be near him, they follow him wherever he goes and whine when he is not home, then greet him with excitement and love when he walks through the door. Neither of them have ever shown any fear towards Michael because they can sense that he is a loving, caring person who would never hurt them. We cannot undo the events of July 19th. We cannot bring back Markeis or ease the pain felt by his family and his children. Everyone's lives are forever changed. My thoughts and prayers go out to Brittany and her children. I am truly sorry for their loss. My husband is not a bad person, not a violent person. He is an honorable man and a good human being. On behalf of myself, our family, and everyone who knows Michael, I am asking you to show leniency when considering Michael's sentence and to give him the least amount of time allowed by the law. Thank you for your time and consideration.
What's your name, first of all?
My name is Michael Mcglockton.
Okay, you may proceed.
To Michael Drejka, because you felt the need to police the parking lot of the Circle A food store, my only birth child is no longer here. You not only took him away from me, you also took him away from his kids, his grandparents, his uncles, his nieces, and his brothers and sisters. Your actions has affected all of us, and because of you, our lives will never be the same. I want you to know that it really hurt me to see the tape when you was in the interview room, and they asked you, and they told you that Markeis had passed away. You showed absolutely no remorse, none. But you also did another interview with Reginald Roundtree after you finally got arrested after 23 or 24 days of being free. You had the audacity to cry or show emotion because you miss your pets and your wife. I want you to know that that was a slap in my face. You deserve to die in prison. In the Bible, it says in order to get into heaven, we must forgive those who trespass against us. At this point in my life, I am not there yet. And if just so happened that the Lord chooses to take me before I come to terms with this, then I will see you in hell where you and I, we will finish this. Mark my words.
All right, thank you, sir. Who's next, State?
Markeis's partner, Brittany Jacobs.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Brittany Jacobs. I am the partner of Markeis Mcglockton. Markeis Mcglockton was my partner in life. He was the father of my children, and he was the man I loved. Markeis was there for me, and he was there for our 3 little children. He worked at night, and during the day, he helped raise our kids. We have 4 children now. We have Markeis is 6, Marley is 4, Marshawn is 1, and I was pregnant when he died, so Markeis didn't see our baby, and his name was Martavius. I never had to ask Markeis for help with his kids. He knew that he knew what they needed, and he loved tending to them. He loved us, and we loved him. Markeis was spiritual, he was protective, and he made us laugh. He was all these things to us and so much more. There are no words to fully describe what his loss has done to our family. There is no way for everyone here to understand the hole that has been left in our world. I want you all to pause and imagine the person you love most. Picture their eyes, picture their smile, and then hear them laugh. Picture how their hand feels in yours and how it feels when they wrap their arms around you and hug you tight. I want you to imagine the spark of joy you feel when you walk in the door at the end of the day and your 3 little children screaming excitedly because the center of their world is home. Imagine the deep sense of warmth it gives you to know you'll spend your life with that person. Now, imagine a cold, empty place. Imagine the silence of the door not opening, of knowing it never will, and what that means for you and your children. Think about what it's like to know you'll never hold their hand and you'll never feel the warmth of hugging them tight. Think about raising 4 children alone without their daddy. Imagine a sense of sadness and pain that you can't ignore. It feels like a weight, and it's one you know you'll carry forever. Without Markeis, my world can never be whole again. Our youngest 2 children will have no memories of their daddy. Our oldest asks me questions about him that I don't have the answers to. And as they get older, our youngest will have their questions too. I'll try to answer as best as I can, but I know I won't have all the answers either. There was only one Markeis, and they'll never know the joy of getting to know their dad. I asked myself why. Why did this happen? How could one person's anger about a parking spot turn into the man I love dying and his 4 children being left without their dad? I asked how. How could a defendant shoot an unarmed man? How does he pull out a gun and watch another man raise his arms and back away and in front of the man's family and still decide he needs to pull the trigger? The defendant's weakness, his cowardness, and his anger couldn't find a way to manage are the reason Markeis is dead. His anger is the reason he wanted to yell at me today at the convenience store. He didn't care that my children was in the car. He was angry, and that what mattered more. Markeis saw a man yelling at his family. He pushed that man to the ground to defend us. It didn't matter when Markeis raised his hands and backed away. The defendant still decided to shoot. His killer wasn't scared. He was frustrated because the defendant wasn't man enough to figure out the way to solve his problems. Markeis died, and my family suffers. The court should remember that this wasn't the first time for the defendant before he shot Markeis. He had an established history of road rage and of starting similar confrontations. In the confrontations he had leading up to Markeis's death, the defendant demonstrated that he was a threat to the community and pulling the trigger on Markeis, and he followed through on that threat. Through his deeds, he has proven he is a man in search of conflict, ready to instigate and then pull the trigger when the situation gets beyond his control. Now he is a convicted killer, and he just deserves to be punished for his actions, just as well as we are accounted for ours. The defendant has said he's sorry, but he's still the man who believes that he was on the right side of the law, and he still is the man who believes that the sheriff's decision was not to arrest him vindicated him. Through his words and his deeds, the defendant has shown that in the depth of remorse hinges on how the law is read. As I sit here today, I am a mother of 4 young children. I no longer have my love, and they are no longer have their dad. The defendant is the only one responsible for that. He killed a man, and he expected the law to let him get off the hook. His pattern of behavior suggests he's a threat, and while I want him punished for what he has done to Markeis and our family, it is more important that he'll never be allowed to do it again. It's for this reason that I implore the court to deny him the ability to ever do this for as long as possible. The defendant deserves the stiffest punishment the law allows. The people in our community deserves to know that he victimized someone else.
Thank you.
Mr. Drejka had been warned previously, and that was the most important thing of that Williams rule. The real crux of that Williams rule was out in that parking lot. He was told, knock it off. You can't do this anymore. It's going to cause a problem. And he acknowledged it. He said, I know, I can't help myself. It always gets me in trouble. And he predicted what was going to happen. He was a man, no matter what you talk about the gun laws, he was a man that should not have possessed a firearm. There are people in this world who are parents who should never be parents. And he's a person that should never possess a firearm, because time after time after time, he showed that he didn't know how to responsibly handle that firearm. We've had an outgoing support from the community on this case. And you know who the strongest support has come from? Gun owners. People who carry the permit, people who carry concealed weapon permit, people who want to have the ability to carry those concealed weapons, people who want to have the ability to carry a firearm in their home for protection. They cried out for justice in this case because they said it gives them a bad name. Lawful gun owners, his behavior gives them a bad name. When you carry a concealed weapon like that, going into a convenience store, you are not supposed to put yourself in the position to have to use that firearm. He puts himself in a position to use it by confronting people. He didn't know who was in that car and who he was confronting and the mental capabilities of the person that he was confronting. It's wrong what he did, terribly wrong. And as a result of it, he took the life of another human being. And little children will never have the opportunity to have their daddy walk them down the aisle at a wedding, the daddy see them come home after their first prom, a daddy to watch them play in their sporting events. When all the other kids have parents there to watch, they'll never have that. That's always going to be missing from their lives because of Michael Drejka. Mr. Drejka didn't have to pull that trigger. He didn't have to fire that gun. He didn't have to take the life of another human being. He didn't have to confront Miss Brittany Jacobs. He had many, many choices. The choice he used was bad. It was wrong. He didn't have to pull that trigger. He didn't have to take the life of a human being. Because of this, we ask that the court sentence him appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Under the law, the people of the state of Florida, at least under certain circumstances, have the right to possess and carry firearms. However, with those rights come responsibilities. Each of us has a duty to act reasonably and responsibly toward others. Each of us has a duty to preserve and protect human life. Sean Brown, the defense firearm expert in this case, said a couple of very important things during the trial. Number one, it is everyone's responsibility to not create conflict so that a person must use a firearm. And number two, that a person must avoid conflict and shoot only as a last resort. John Tyler, who was Ricky Kelly's boss in this case, testified during the trial that he owns a firearm, and in his training, he was taught to remove himself from heated situations. That makes sense. The jury in this case found that the defendant did not act reasonably and did not act responsibly when he shot and killed Markeis Mcglockton back on July 19, 2018. It's important to understand the context of all the facts in this case so that everyone has an understanding as to what led up to this and what happened. The defendant was 47 years old at the time of the shooting. According to his own taped statement, his father was a law enforcement officer, and he himself always wanted to be a law enforcement officer. But he stated that his father did not allow him to become a law enforcement officer. And at one point, he even said that the father said that he would break his arm if he became a police officer for whatever reason. So he became a clearanced tree trimmer, and he retired in 2006 and 2007. He indicated that he inherited a lot of money from his mother, so he was retired for a long period of time at a young age. He did have a daily routine while he was retired. He would go to the Circle A convenience store every day and he would buy Monster drinks. I think the owner of the store, it was said that he would buy 4 at a time. I think the defendant indicated that he bought 2. But one of his main hobbies, and let's be honest, the evidence showed that the defendant was a wannabe law enforcement officer. He became the handicapped parking space monitor and enforcer at the Circle A convenience store. When people parked in the handicapped parking space, the defendant would inspect their vehicles and would photograph their vehicles. And why would he do this? In his taped interview, he said why. And in his own words, it was to F with people. That's exactly what he said. In the transcript, and these are exact quotes here, the defendant says, "But when they see me doing stuff like that, they automatically think, hey, what's this guy trying to do? F me." And then the detective says, "Wouldn't you think that a little bit if somebody came taking pictures around your car?" And then the defendant says, "Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do." So he is agreeing that he's confronting people to harass them and mess with them, and in his words, F with them. So apparently when he does this and people show respect and perhaps fear, he has no problem with the way things are going because he is getting respect. He is enjoying himself being a wannabe law enforcement officer of this handicapped parking space. By the way, this handicapped space is on the side of the Circle A. It's not even in the front where the front door is. So it's not even the best the parking space in the whole parking lot of the Circle A. I understand that there's a ramp near there, but it's also near the front as well. So it's not even a really ideal parking space. So when there's disrespect that's shown to the defendant, he becomes irate. And an example of this is back on February the 14th of 2008. Ricky Kelly parks his truck in the infamous handicap parking space at the Circle A convenience store. Kelly goes into the store to buy a soda. The defendant approaches the truck. The defendant inspects the truck, and he takes photographs of the truck. Kelly comes out of the store and asks the defendant what he's doing. They get into a heated argument. The defendant feels disrespected, and he says, according to Mr. Kelly, and I quote, "I should kill you. I should shoot you." And by the way, the defendant admitted that he had this verbal confrontation with Ricky Kelly. And he admitted that the only thing that happened out there on February the 14th was a verbal confrontation. And according to Ricky Kelly, he says, "I should kill you. I should shoot you." The defendant then goes into his vehicle and is rummaging around in the center console, apparently trying to get a gun. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that he's trying to get anything else when he goes into his vehicle and he is searching for something. Right after he says, "I should kill you, I should shoot you." So probably the smartest thing that anyone did in this case is what Mr. Kelly did at this point, which is to hop in his truck and drive off. The defendant then calls Mr. Kelly's boss, John Tyler, and in the taped interview, the defendant did admit that he called John Tyler. And according to Mr. Tyler, the defendant says, and I quote again, "If I had a gun, I would have shot him." So the defendant admits it's just a verbal confrontation out there. And according to Ricky Kelly, he says, "I should kill you, I should shoot you." And he says to John Tyler, "If I had a gun, I would have shot him." So the owner of the store speaks to the defendant after this, and he tells him he needs to modify his behavior. He tells the defendant to stop messing with people and stop harassing people and stop fighting with people because it's not worth it. And then the defendant says, according to the owner of the store, and I quote here, "I cannot help it. I get myself in trouble." Well, the evidence showed that the defendant did modify his behavior, but he didn't stop messing with people or harassing people or confronting people or, in his words, effing with people. This is how he modified his behavior. It seemed like he didn't actually have the gun on him on February the 14th, based upon his statements and the fact that he went in looking for something in the vehicle. This is how he modifies his behavior. Now, when he confronts people and he harasses people, he carries a firearm. That's the modification of the behavior. Instead of stopping harassing people and confronting people and creating conflict, he modifies his behavior by actually having the firearm on his person. During the taped interview of the defendant, the detective says, "Does it ever go through your mind that when you go up and talking to these people, informing them of them being parked in a handicapped spot, that they might not take that right, that this might go sideways a little bit?" And then the defendant says, well, sure, but that's why I take precautions as well. Then the detective says, like what? What kind of precautions? The defendant says, well, I'm a very careful person and I have a permit. So what he's saying there is he can create conflict, he can create confrontation, and if there's an issue, he has a firearm. So if he creates a conflict and things go sideways, he can just shoot somebody. That's really what he's saying. So that's the defendant's mindset that leads up to what happened on July the 19th, 2008. And his mindset's important because although it's arguably not that significant in a manslaughter case, it's very significant in a self-defense case, justifiable use of deadly force or not. Then comes the shooting death of Markeis Mcglockton on July 19th, 2018. Brittany Jacobs drives her vehicle to the Circle A convenience store. Markeis Mcglockton is in the front passenger seat, and their 3 young children are in the back seat. Brittany parks in the infamous handicap parking space. And most of this is on video. We see Markeis going into the store along with their 5-year-old son, little Markeis, to buy some drinks and some food. The 2 youngest children remain in the back seat. Brittany remains in the vehicle. Michael Drejka, the defendant in this case, then drives up rather quickly and parks his vehicle near Brittany's vehicle. And this is right on the video. And he just seems to come out of nowhere, kind of like a superhero, to make sure he enforces this violation of the handicap parking spot. Now, I don't know where he came from. There's a gun shop across the street. I don't know if that's where he was, but he just seems to come out of nowhere. And the most ironic thing about this whole case is he parks illegally. He doesn't even park in a parking space. He parks close to Brittany Jacobs to argue about her parking illegally, and to do this, he zooms up and he parks illegally. That's the most ironic thing about this whole case. So our wannabe police officer is there. He gets out of the vehicle. He approaches Brittany's vehicle. He looks all around the vehicle, looks into the vehicle. Brittany rolls down the window. And like Ricky Kelly, she's not going to be as respectful as the defendant would like. She argues with him and shows a lack of respect. The defendant becomes irate. He points at Brittany and screams at Brittany and This is on the video, and it's corroborated by one of the witnesses who indicated that she thought that the defendant was being threatening, that he was loud and confrontational and threatening. Now, Markeis is in the store, and he's told by somebody to go out into the parking lot because there's an issue out there, and he needs to go out there. Markeis goes out there. In the meantime, Brittany's getting out of the car. She doesn't go too far. Markeis observes that the defendant continues to be irate and points at Brittany and is yelling and screaming at her. Markeis approaches the defendant, and no doubt about it, he pushes him down, and he pushes him down hard. The defendant then pulls out his gun, and let me say this about the video. Believe your own eyes. All right, the gun comes out. Markeis doesn't step toward the defendant. Markeis goes back, and he turns his body as if to flee back into the store. Now, I know that that's not what the defense argument was, at least pre-trial, but one thing that I noticed is that Daniel Buffington, the pharmacologist, testified in this case, and he testified that he saw the video, and he testified that when Mr. Drejka pulled out the gun, that Markeis Mcglockton backed up and retreated and turned his body. So I don't know if he was actually supposed to say that, but that's exactly what he said. So you have to believe your own eyes, whatever that is. The defendant then shoots Markeis in the side. Obviously, this corroborates the fact that he was turning his body in a defensive position. That's not an offensive position, that's a defensive position when you go back and you turn your body and you try to get out of there. Markeis then flees into the store where he collapses and he dies right in front of his 5-year-old son. The defendant is later interviewed, and he admits the following: that Markeis made no verbal threats, that he said nothing at all, that he had no weapon. The defendant admitted that he was only slightly dazed when he fell. The defendant insisted that Markeis took a step toward him right before he shot him, and at one point the defendant stated that Markeis took even more than one step. And again, in the tape interview, the detective says, and I quote, "He only made one step," and then the defendant said, quote, "He barely made the second step before I pulled the trigger." So he was saying that there was one step and then the beginning of another step. But if you look at that video, Markeis is not advancing. The defendant admitted that the shooting would be unjustified if Markeis was retreating or standing still. Again, here's the taped interview, and these are direct quotes. The detective says, "If he didn't come toward you, would you still have fired a round?" The defendant says, "Hell no. There's no reason to. If he's retreating, then I don't need to use my firearm." The detective says, "What if he's standing still?" And the defendant says, "I still don't need to use any firearm." And again, the video indicates that Markeis wasn't going toward him, that he wasn't standing still, that he was retreating and he was turning his body. Under Florida law, to justify the use of deadly force, the appearance of danger must have been so real that a reasonably cautious and prudent person under the same circumstances would have believed that the danger could be avoided only through the use of that force. The jury found that the defendant's actions were not excusable and they were not justified. No one really used perfect judgment in this case. Perhaps everyone could have done a little something a little bit different. Perhaps some people could have done a lot different. But the evidence in this case shows that the defendant created conflict and created a confrontation, that he shot and killed an unarmed man who was backing up and retreating and was trying to save his own life by retreating once he saw the firearm. And he did flee into the store, where he died right in front of his young son. One cannot say that that is unaggravated in regard to all of these facts. In order for me to depart, it's a two-pronged test, and it's one of the unusual situations where the defense actually has the burden of proof. They have to show, number one, that there's a legal reason for departure, and number two, that I should do it under all the facts and circumstances. They have to show both prongs. I do agree with the state in that I'm not really sure that I heard any remorse in this case. What I've heard is that the defendant felt that he was justified in doing what he did and that he would do it again. That's not really remorse. In regard to this interview with Reginald Roundtree, I've never seen it. It's not part of the record. I heard from the defense that he was remorseful there. I heard from the witnesses that he was remorseful about not being able to see his dogs and his wife. The bottom line is this, that I really haven't heard in this courtroom any remorse. So irrespective, quite frankly, of whether there is a legal reason for a departure, I'm going to find that based upon the totality of the circumstances, that a departure is not warranted. So the only reason I brought up the lack of remorse situation was because the defense brought it up in regard to legal reasons for a departure. And I'm going to find that there's not a legal reason for a departure. I'll also find that even if there is a legal reason for departure, under the second prong, I'm going to find that it is not appropriate under all the facts and circumstances here. So having said all that, regarding the background and the facts of the case, I'm going to find that it's not an unaggravated situation. However, there certainly is mitigation, and I have to consider any and all aggravation and any and all mitigation, because my job is to do justice in the case, and that's what judges do, and that's what judges are supposed to do. There's absolutely nothing improper whatsoever about the legislative branch or the executive branch looking at the poll numbers and considering that 44,000 people said this and 44,000 people said that, but it's my job as a judge to do what, in my estimation, is justice in this case. There is mitigation in this case. The defendant was blindsided. He was pushed down rather violently. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He did indicated that he was at least slightly dazed when he was pushed down. He didn't flee. He did cooperate with the police. Perhaps the biggest mitigation is he has no prior record. Now, one reason that he cooperated with the police and he didn't flee was because he thought that he was justified in doing this, which the jury found was not true. And the evidence would also show that as well. Accordingly, after that rather detailed legal and factual analysis, the sentence will be as follows. Mr. Drejka, I'm going to find you guilty. I'm going to adjudicate you guilty. I'm going to sentence you to 20 years in the Department of Corrections with all credit for time served. And I believe he has in 91 days, is that it? 92 days, with credit for 92 days. As I said before, court costs are $550. That includes a discretionary felony fine of $125.72, $100 for cost of prosecution, the $50 public defender application fee, a $7 charge for DNA. All those fees and costs are payable to the clerk's office. And there will be a restitution lien of $5,000. And who would we like that to go to? The mother, the father, Brittany Jacobs.
Ms. Jacobs.
All right. So a $5,000 restitution lien to Brittany Jacobs.